All right, let's get to proper stuff. So let's talk about 2030. Let's talk about targets. Let's talk about Albo on his mystery flight rubbish, right? Okay, so I'll be very direct. When I heard Libs pulling out a Paris Agreement, I've gone, what? Hang on, how does this help in the 10 seats that they need and all the rest of it, right? Matt Canavan comes on the show on Monday and says, well, you've overcomplicated it. It's just about what you believe in, whether this is the right way to go or the wrong way to go. And just like many people said, well, the conventional wisdom is, yes, it's going to get up. Well, he picked no when it was 60-40, and guess where it all ended up? Bronwyn, have they done the right thing, or do they need Trump to win, bills to keep going up, and then they can start to win?
It's the right thing. And historically, since the Rudd was first elected, the coalition has won seats and won elections in every election except 2022, when, because of Morrison going off to Glasgow, it was no longer an issue of difference between the parties, but we won every other time. When it's in contention and people focus on what it is doing to their lives, and when Peter says that he's focused on Australia, not Paris, and he won't bankrupt the country to meet the unattainable target of the Labor Party, makes a lot of sense.
Well, especially when, particularly, as Sherry was reporting, if the conversation is currently 43 we can't get to, but we'll eventually get to 75 by 2035, then again, the enormity of change. If the easy stuff has already been done, then clearly that's going to be fascinating about what and where. Stephen?
Destroys entirely our rural industries.
Well, this is it. I wanted to get Stephen in, and then we can get into the fight about it all. Stephen, the reverse of the tough question to you, right? Because, again, I know sort of the ease with which it's like, OK, please, feel free to step on this landmine. But if Trump becomes president, and then you end up with a scenario that I outlined before where China doesn't get measured till 2030, the US pulls out completely. That's 43% of global emissions. Good luck trying to sell people on 75% of 1% is urgently needed by 2035.
Look, I mean, the maths of what you described there don't represent the debate in Australia. The majority of the Australian public, as demonstrated by the last election, believe that we need to move to renewables, and they would like to move them as fast as we can. The challenge for Labor has always been, and I think it's beginning to absolutely get into the sweet spot, is that it absolutely says gas has to be part of this transition. That was always going to be needed to be the case, no matter how hysterical the Greens got. The manufacturing sector in this country, which we're trying to rebuild, need a gas supplied electricity in the short term. So managing the gas part of this equation, albeit drawing criticism from the Greens, has always been Labor's challenge. I think it's hitting the sweet spot right now. I think it's in a position where it can manage its way through the transition. But Peter Dutton's position of saying, I'm not going to tell you, it's too hard to do out of government. I've seen experiments like this before, not having a policy. You're able to be attacked from all sides, frankly.
But that's
and what
the
it's really done is it said, if I can just finish, Bronwyn, what it's really done is it said to every single teal and green voter, every single teal and green voter, if I want to see action on climate change, I have to give my preference to Labor.
Listen, I'm going to tell you.
You like Labor or not on the Middle East, every preference will be coming to Labor now, and that's where I think the mistake Peter Dutton's made.
I would suggest, by the way, just slightly though, conversely, of course, if One Nation's currently sitting, at 7%, if they ended up with a preference mix that gets closer back to 2019 than 2022, then that will help the LNP in some areas, not all areas. But again, I suppose that's their argument, that if we can get the primary vote to 40 plus all of this game. But let's get back to
we are yet to see whether the money will flow in the same way for the Teals as it did previously, because already the person who gave them $500 million has said no more, because she's Jewish.
Ah, yes.
And not interested. So there's a hole for starters.
$500,000, but
we also I remarkably heard McKellar referred to as an inner city seat. Really?
Yeah.
I don't think so. And I would remind everyone who likes to look at the figures from the no vote, that it was virtually 50-50.
Yeah.
And that was with no support from the Liberal Party at all, just committed people in the electorate who said, we're going to vote no.
So, okay, so Stephen, I want to just ask this one more and then we'll move on, right? Which is, we can see where Albo's going to try to fight it. On again, the assumption that horses bolted, just like boats for the left, climate change for the right has to be solved, deal with, all the rest. Bronwyn's shaking her head, which is why I asked this question. Do we have to be careful about what we assume is conventional political wisdom about the financial costs of things when the financial mix of voters in 24 and 25 is very different than it was in 22?
Correct.
Well, look, I think that's a absolute fair point. And what we know right now today is the most potent issue across the entire country, regional, inner north, inner south, wherever you want to talk about, is cost of living. So Peter Dutton's only path forward here is to link further rises in energy prices purely to the government's policies. Now, the problem he's got consistently is that the state Liberal parties don't support him on this.
But
Matt
they don't
Keane,
matter.
very close and dear friend of Bronwyn.
Matt Keane doesn't
Matt
matter
Keane,
a row of beans.
close and dear friend. The state
He is now
Liberals
irrelevant.
closed coal mines. Federal, state Labor government keeping
and they
the
lost
coal-fired power
government too.
station going longer. Okay, so the problem is that the state Liberals continue to have an entirely different position to Peter Dutton. And it's going to be hard for him to try and blame these things entirely on Labor because his own state, former now, as Bronwyn correctly says, state governments, contributed to the price increases because they closed down. Just like Daniel Andrews closed down too quickly a coal-fired power station that was needed in Victoria, Matt Keane did the same. So it's a more complex issue today than it was 5 years ago.
No, Stephen.
Because
in fact, I
state
said
Liberal
before
governments closed it down.
I said before the last state election that should Perrottet lose, it will be Matt Keane's fault. And it was. And he is a pariah in the party. Useless and irrelevant. So the important thing, the point that you did make that is right, is that the question of the cost of the transmission lines that are being rolled out, the cost of the ambition of Mr Bowen is going to hurt the Australian people, and it is linked to the cost of living, and that is Labor's policy.
Well, this is
this is the key issue,
This is
and they're
why.
wound into one.